friends, my name is Sagar Shah and I'm back with a video on Anand Carlsen match. The Anand Carlsen match was dubbed by many as the match of the millennium. People who even were not used to playing chess got interested to the game. Not only in India but all over the world, chess became one of the mainly talked about sports. In my own country, India, people were so chess crazy that I would often receive messages from my friends who hardly ever played chess as to why did Carlsen make such a move, or why did Anand move his rook to this square, and things like that. The off-the-board effects of the match were terrific. Chess as a sport gained a lot of popularity. But what exactly happened on the board? We are more interested in that. On the board, as you all know, Carlsen slayed Anand brutally. The match ended before even the stipulated 12 games. It ended in only 10 games, with the scoreline being 6.5 to 3.5 in the favor of Magnus. Carlsen won 3 games and drew 7, not allowing Anand to even win 1 game. But was the match really so one-sided as it looked? I don't think so. The match had a lot of interesting moments and lot of moments from which we can learn from. So I have come up with a series of 2 parts of lectures in which the first part I'll be covering the games 1 to 5 and in the second part games 6 to 10. So what are we waiting for? Let's transport ourselves to 9th November 2013, the first day of the match and when the first game was played. The first game began with the move knight f3 when Magnus had the white pieces. We quickly reached to a position which is very popular in the Grunfeld defense. In this position, it's white to play. Over here, the safest move for white would be to just play knight bd2, and after this, black usually replies knight e4 and white has a small edge after knight h4, knight takes d2, queen takes d2, bishop e6, c into d5, c into d5, knight f3. In such a position, white risks absolutely nothing. And I think this was the kind of position that Magnus was aiming for when he played the first game. But in this position, instead of playing knight bd2, Magnus continued knight c3. And he expected Anand to play knight e4 when the play would be pretty similar. For example, after knight e4, c into d5, knight into c3, bishop into c3, cd5, rook c1. White has a risk-free edge and a very nice position. But Anand came better prepared. He took to knight c4, knight c3, he took on c4. A very concrete move, giving up the center. After b takes c4, Anand continued his energetic play in the opening with knight to b6. Now the c4 pawn is attacked and there are actually only 2 ways to defend it, either with queen to b3 or pushing the pawn ahead with c5. Magnus chose to push the pawn to c5, but if he would have played queen b3, then after bishop e6, there's further pressure on the c4 pawn, and say after knight d2, already knight into c4, knight c4, b5 gives black an excellent position. So Magnus continued with c5, and after knight to c4, attacking the bishop on b2, Magnus had to retreat bishop c1. Anand continued knight d5. This is an excellent play by Anand. He is now threatening the knight on c3, and Carlsen replied with queen to b3. After the game, Carlsen said that he was intending to play queen e1, but after knight b4, the move which he had missed, I think black already has a very good position. So after queen b3, Anand continued knight a5, attacking the queen on b3. And there is logically only one move, that is queen a3. Okay, queen b2 is also pretty similar, but queen a3. And here Anand replied knight to c4 back, queen b3, knight a5, queen a3, knight c4, queen, and a draw was agreed by threefold repetition. I think that if Anand were to be given another chance in this position over here, he would have definitely continued with the move b6. After queen a3, b6. I think the point here is that the center is pretty weak for white. The bishop on g7 is very powerful looking over here. So now the threat might be to take on c5, and if Carlsen takes on b6, suddenly the rook on a8 is activated. Many people after the game commented that Anand took a draw pretty prematurely, but I think that in the first game of the match, maybe the players just wanted to get into the groove. The powerful moves of d into c4, knight b6, knight c4, knight d5, which were made by Anand, gives us an impression that he was excellently prepared in the opening. What we learn from this is that if Magnus even played a remotely popular position which Anand had prepared, then he was in for big trouble. Anand is always and will be always known for his opening preparation. And hence, one of the most important things Magnus learned from this game is to stay clear of known positions. But one more important thing happened in the first game itself. Anand, who had a small advantage in the end, that is in the last position, went for the threefold repetition instead of continuing the game. If Magnus had the black pieces and was in Anand's shoes and in that same position, I am sure he would have continued. It was this satisfied approach of Anand in the start and not having the hunger to win was, I think, the primary reason for which he couldn't take the lead and couldn't hit the opponent when he was the weakest. There was a huge anticipation as to what would be Anand's first move. There was high possibility that he would go for d4 because that was the move that he had been playing in the past few World Championship matches. But the fact that Peter Lecco was in his team of seconds meant that there was an equally good chance of playing e4, and that is what Anand played. He started off the game with e4, and Magnus had learnt his lesson yesterday and he was all ready to surprise Anand with the move c6. This is, I think, the only the second time in his life that Magnus has played the Caro-Kann defense. Okay, maybe the third time. After d4, d5, knight c3, de, knight e4, bishop f5, knight g3, bg6, h4, h6, knight f3, things became clear that Anand would have definitely analyzed this opening also. The point is that in this position, the main move for black is definitely knight to d7. This move has around 12 to 13,000 games being played. But what Magnus chose was the relatively lesser played move e6. So you can see that first of all Magnus not only surprised Anand by playing the Caro-Kann defense, being an e4 e5 player, so Anand might not have expected the Caro-Kann, and secondly Anand must have worked on the Caro-Kann, but in that too Magnus came up with a sideline, which I am sure Anand would have great difficulty in remembering the analysis. This move e6 was not being played because White would continue knight e5 attacking the g6 bishop, and after bishop h7, bd3, takes on d3, queen d3, knight d7, f4, White has quite a good center control. But Magnus was playing quickly. He was hardly stopping to think. He played his moves with great confidence, and I think in a way it affected Anand. Magnus continued bishop b4, c3, bishop e7, bd2, knight f6. Let's not get into the details. We get to a very critical position. After a long castle, Magnus went for short castle. At this point, everyone was feeling that this would be the match that would be really exciting. This would be the game that would be really exciting. And after knight e4, Anand wanted to make way for his pawn to go to g4. But Magnus was well prepared. He took on e4, queen e4, and made the very surprising move knight into e5. I was expecting him to play knight to f6, but this was a very nice move. After fe5, he centralized his queen to d5, attacking the pawn on a2, as well as the queen, offering a queen exchange. Now a very interesting thing happened, and one from which we can learn a lot. The point is that in this position, the best move is definitely queen to g4. Now that is for sure. After the move queen g4, black cannot take the pawn on a2, because after queen a2, bishop h6, g6, h5, white has a nearly decisive attack. So the point is, after queen g4, black has to play king h7, and white can continue king b1, c5, bishop e3, with an extremely complicated position where I think white has some better chances. But let's look at the psychological point in the picture. When Magnus played his queen to d5, he had not even used 5 minutes of his time. He was just blitzing out his moves. That meant he was still into his preparation. Now Anand by this point was already on his own. If Anand had to make a move like queen g4, he would be playing against an opponent who was very well prepared in the ensuing position. And hence Anand took the safe route, queen takes d5, but after the move cd5, it already became clear that white could no longer try for an advantage. The game ended in a draw after a few moves. What is the biggest lesson that can be learned from game 2? I think it is the fact that when facing an extremely well prepared opponent, you must try to surprise him as soon as possible. First of all, Magnus surprised Anand by playing the Caro-Kann defense, which he never used to play. And secondly, he surprised him not only in the main opening, but also in the sub variation when he chose e6 instead of knight d7. What we can take from this is that when we face a very well prepared opponent, we can play something which we have never played before. But bear in mind that your opponent will not be like Anand. Maybe he might go for the most critical continuation. Your analysis should be good at that point. But the biggest advantage that you will have is that in the ensuing complicated position, you will have better experience, more analysis, and you would remember the analysis better, and there would be a better chance of you winning the game. In third game of the match, Carlsen played the Reti opening with one knight f3 and gained a pretty good position out of the opening. This is the position after 12 moves. It's white to play, and over here I invite you to take some time and try to find the best move for white. Okay, in this position Carlsen continued with the move bishop to b4, which turned out to be an inaccuracy because Vichy played a very natural bishop e6, and after queen to c1 he put his bishop to d5 when he was already starting to threaten the moves like b6, c5 and taking over the space on the queen side. Okay, so let's go back to this position where I asked you to find the best move for white. Bishop d4 is a good move for white, but the problem is that black attacks the queen with bishop e6, and therefore white should remove his queen from the c4 square with a tempo by playing queen to c1, attacking the pawn on h6. This would be an excellent move, and after king to h7, white can play now bishop b4 when black has serious problems finishing his development. For example, if he goes bishop e6 now, it will be met with knight to c5. Okay, so let's move ahead to this game to the position on move number 27. In this position, Anand made the last move b5. As you can see, Carlsen's queen is quite oddly placed on h1. Black has a wonderful initiative. He has the two bishops, at the same time a queenside majority from which he would like to create a passed pawn. In such a position, if Carlsen were to play passively by taking the bishop on e6, then after queen takes e6, black, it's an opposite colored bishop position, but I think black has a huge advantage because he's the only one that has some play in this position. But over here, Carlsen made the excellent move e3. The point is, this move objectively might be weak, but in a way, he is trying to open up the position before black's activity becomes too much. He doesn't want to suffer in passivity. He wants to counterattack. Okay, after d takes e3, the move made by Anand, rook takes e3, we reach the most critical position, I would say, not only of the game, but also of the entire match. In fact, this position has been debated many times after the match as to why didn't Anand take the pawn on b2. Over here, Anand played the move bishop to d4. The point is, he should have bravely gone ahead and taken the pawn on b2, attacking the rook on a1, and after rook e1, e6 bishop is hanging, so you have to play rook to b6 and bishop h3. This position definitely looks scary for black, but he is a pawn up and he has good chances over here if he were to play bishop to d4. Now after knight, in this position, knight takes e6, f e6, rook takes e6, rook takes e6, rook e6, queen f7, attacking the pawn on f2, queen g2. The material is even, but after b4, black has a decisive advantage because the b pawn will be very strong. The point to note here is that after bishop h3, Vichy thought that white has lot of counterplay. He was not ready to go into concrete calculations against Carlsen. Hence, he played in this position the move, instead of bishop b2, he played bishop to d4, and after rook e2, black was still better, but Carlsen managed to defend himself and eventually he made a draw. The game number 3 was a very interesting game of the match. In fact, from this game, I would say there are 3 things to be learned. The first one, which was very crucial, is that in the opening, the move that Carlsen played, bishop b4, which was the most natural, turned out to be an inaccuracy. He should have played queen to c1. The point that I am trying to make is that at the highest level, you have to be very alert even to snatch the smallest of advantages. If Carlsen would have played queen c1 followed by bishop b4, he would not have got a winning position. He would have got a small advantage by which he could have pressed his opponent for a long time, which might have induced the mistake. One must never leave such chances. The second thing that we learned from the third game was that the move e3 made by Carlsen. Often we land in passive positions in which the opponent has lot of play. In such situations, we should not try to keep on defending passively, because if you do that, sooner or later the opponent will land a killer blow. What Carlsen did by making the move e3 was that he opened up the position, as a result of which it completely changed the dynamism of the game and Anand wasn't able to shift his focus. Instead of taking the pawn on b2, he played his bishop to d4, which showed that he was not ready for a complicated battle. The third thing which one should always learn is that when the position requires a lot of deep calculation, you should make it. Like in that position, when Anand should have taken the pawn on b2, he should have done that. The move bishop d4 was sort of a lazy move. He was not ready to calculate and he always felt that white had counterplay. But when facing a strong opponent like Carlsen, you have to take your chances when they come. And bishop into b2 was the chance which Anand missed. The thing which we can learn from this is that you can keep on playing, building up your advantage till a certain point. After that, there will become a situation in which you will have to take concrete actions. You should be ready for that and you should be brave to calculate deep and complicated variations. Only then can you beat opponents who are stronger than you. The fourth game of the Anand Carlsen match was, I think, the most interesting game of the match. Anand played his customary move e4 and Carlsen, instead of playing the Caro-Kann, this time played the classical king's pawn opening e5. The players then played the Berlin defense and we reached the following endgame. In this endgame, it is white to play. Anand has to come up with a logical plan. In this position, Anand played the move knight to e1. A lot of people criticized this move, saying that it was completely illogical and a very passive move and stuff like that. But I beg to differ. There is a certain logic to this move, even though it might not be the best move. The point is that in the Berlin, the bishop on e6 is a very strong piece. It protects the square on d7, which can be a good entry point for the rooks. Hence, white should try to eliminate this bishop. Now, the squares from which the bishop can be eliminated were g5 and d4. But both these squares are protected by the black pawns. Hence, white has to try to find a new square, and that new square is definitely the square on f4. And that's what Anand tried to do. He brought his knight back to e1. His idea is to put the knight on d3 so that it attacks the pawn on c5 and at the same time looks to go to f4. Okay, so Carlsen played his knight to g6, and in this way he attacks the pawn on e5. Anand played nd3, and now he attacks the pawn on c5. Black played the solid move b6. Mind you, if he plays c4, black gets knight c5, and now white gets knight c5, and black is in huge trouble because once this bishop is eliminated, white will be better. For example, after knight takes e5, knight e6, fe6, rook e2, this is already a close to winning position for white. Okay, so Carlsen played the solid move b6, and now Anand continued his logical strategy with knight to e2. As you already know, his idea is to play his knight to f4 and then eliminate this bishop. Okay, now over here Carlsen played a very stunning move. He took the pawn on a2. It was sort of reminiscent of the 1972 match between Bobby Fischer and Boris Spassky, game number 1, in which Fischer picked the pawn on h2 and then got his bishop trapped. But here Carlsen had calculated very deeply. Let us just see what happened. b3, of course, now the bishop is trapped and the threat is knight to c3. So black played c4. Now Anand played his knight to c1, and after cb3, bishop b1, the bishop is now ready to run away to f5. Many people said that Anand missed this move bishop b1, but I don't think it's correct. Anand didn't miss this move of bishop b1. He said that in this position he felt something would turn up for white because he is so well developed. He has both his rooks well placed and his knight is pretty decently placed, whereas this bishop is quite awkward. At the same time, the rook is out of the game, and so in this position Anand was searching for something concrete to happen. Over here, I think Anand must have definitely considered two moves. One of them is a very interesting move, and that is to play e6, a pawn sacrifice. After f into e6, the idea is now to trap the b1 bishop with knight to c3, bishop f5 and g4. But here I'm sure that Carlsen calculated this move, knight to h4, which makes way for the bishop to go back, and if the bishop is captured, then after knight f3, black wins the rook, and then he would have a definite advantage in the position. So e6, f into e6, knight c3, bishop f5, g4 is met with knight h4. So the first trick for Anand to play e6 does not work. So let's go back to this position. e6 is not working. So Anand must definitely be considering the very natural move rook to d7. I'm sure that if Anand would have thought that this move gives him sufficient counterplay. I will ask you to take some time in this position and try to come up with a good move for black. Of course, the most natural move in this position is to take the pawn on e5, but after rook e7 attacking the knight, f6, knight c3, bishop c2, rook d2, bishop f5, rook into g7. White has excellent compensation. His knight is looking in to come to b5 or d5, and the pawns on f6 and c7 are pretty weak. Anand would have been very happy with this position. But after rook d7, black has an excellent move. And I'm sure to find this move, you have to be a player of a very high caliber. It's a great prophylactic move, and the move is rook to g8. This is a wonderful move. The threat is now to take the pawn on e5 and then to play f6. So if white plays rook into f7, then after knight e5, black is already better, as the g7 pawn is guarded. And if white continues with f4 protecting the pawn on e5, then black can play the move bishop c2 attacking the rook on d1, and after rook d2 play bishop f5. And in this way he saves everything, because if white takes on f7, then bishop e6 traps the rook. What a wonderful variation we saw. You might think that this variation is nothing spectacular because there is no attacking motive or no sacrifice, but mind you, the move of rook g8 is very difficult to find over the board, and I'm sure that Carlsen must have calculated it when he went in for the move bishop takes a2. So in this position, when Carlsen decided to take the pawn on a2, it was move number 18, but I think he saw all the way up to the move rook to g8, which was move number 22, and in this position black defends everything. Excellent play by Carlsen, who got the advantage in this game, but it was only with some miraculous defense that Anand was able to defend his position and make an eventual draw. The thing to learn from game number 4 is that you have to back yourself. Carlsen picked off the pawn on a2. It looked extremely dangerous, but he put his head down, he calculated the variations, the intricacies, the deep ideas, the complications. He did everything, and then he couldn't find a refutation, so he went ahead with taking the pawn. He backed himself, and that's why he is today world number 1 and also the strongest player in the world. If at any point in your game a stronger player than you offers you material and you see nothing wrong with it, go ahead, be confident, make your calculations and take it, because after all, it's only if you back yourself will you be successful in the game of chess. The fifth game of the match was the decisive game. It ended in a win for Carlsen. Carlsen, instead of his usual nf3 move, went for c4. Anand played e6, d4, d5, knight c3, c6. This is known as the triangle variation because black forms a triangle in the center. Over here, white has many possibilities, and one of them is to play his knight to f3. Now, after knight f3, dc4, a4, bishop b4, e3, b5 leads to the very sharp note boom variation. Of course, Carlsen didn't want to play any sharp lines because he knew that Anand would be very well prepared. Okay, so if not this, then can white over here play e3? This is a very tame move and it gives black two possibilities. One is to get the stone wall defense, in which black has very good possibilities, and the other one is to play the knight to f6, which leads to semi-Slav openings and which would give black a very complicated game, which is again what Anand wants. So Carlsen went for the most uncompromising move and he played e4. After d takes e4, knight e4, Anand gave a check on b4. Over here, when I was sitting in the playing hall, I became very excited because the main move in this position is bishop to d2. After that, if black plays queen takes d4, bishop takes b4, queen into e4 check, bishop e2, and this leads to an extremely complicated position. Now imagine that to play this position on the World Championship level against Anand would require some excellent preparation from the white side. And Carlsen, ever since the first game, had known that it would not be an easy task to win an opening battle against Anand. Hence, in this position, when black gave bishop to b4 check, Carlsen played the very tame move knight to c3. Now, since a long time ago, it had been proved that knight to c3 equalizes if black plays the move c5. Now this gives black an excellent position and Anand made that move. The point to note is that the position might be equal, but it might be possible that Anand has not studied it deeply. Hence, Carlsen made the next few moves a3, bishop a5, knight f3, knight f6, bishop e3, and we got a position which was complicated and not at all thoroughly analyzed. It is a fresh position and one in which both players will have to think for themselves. Thus, Carlsen was able to bring Anand out of his preparation and get into a position which he would like, and after a long grind, after playing for nearly 58 moves, Anand finally threw in the towel. He was close to a draw on many occasions in the game, but finally the stamina and the willpower of the 22-year-old Magnus Carlsen prevailed over Vishy Anand. When Anand made the move knight c3 to Vishy's bishop b4 check, it made a deep impact on me. The point is that everyone used to say the move knight c3 is not so good. It gives black clear equality. And look what Magnus did. He played it at the highest level, and not only that, he gained a small advantage from the opening and he won the game against Vishy. The point that I am trying to make here is that Magnus Carlsen does not follow what others say. He always tries to have his own opinions on the game of chess, and that's why he is world number one. What we can learn from this is that whenever you read a book or you watch a lecture or you are reading some analysis in some magazine, try to keep your mind alert. Try to see if what the author is saying is truth. If the author says the position is better for white, try to think whether it really is. If the author says there is compensation, you must be inquisitive and see whether really there is compensation. The point is that if you are inquisitive, only then will you be able to learn. And it's only with this approach of trying to unearth the truth that you will be able to progress in the game of chess. And when you shall have your own opinions on something, it is then you will truly enjoy this royal game. Magnus Carlsen won the fifth game and thus took a points lead in the match. After the match, Vishy Anand said that the game number 5 was the turning point of the match. The point was that he was close to a draw on so many occasions and he kept on blundering, and in the end he lost the game. This affected his confidence hugely and it all started to go downhill from there. In game number 6, the players had again reached a drawish position and again Carlsen was able to beat Anand. But hey, we are getting ahead of ourselves. The first part of my video series is dedicated to games number 1 to 5. I hope that you learned a lot from these games, and I'm going to come back soon with games number 6 to 10 and we will analyze as to what happened in these next 5 games. But for now, I leave you with these 5 games and hope you enjoyed them. This is Sagar Shah signing off. Thank you.